femininity doesn't act this way, and it does not present this way, and it does not follow these rules in life. Like, the universe doesn't work on binaries. And so it's just like, it's actually this paradox, and it's like there's so many things that could be true at once that contradict each other.
Some of like the role or function of like art and creativity and even like stuff like these conversations is like, we're never going to arrive at like solid ground. So we're perpetually kind of like just stretching.
The big hormone Enneagram.
I'm John Lekovich, 415, sexual self-pres, 458 trifix.
I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual, 9 with 1 wing, 974 trifix.
What up, it's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a social self-preservation 9-wing-1, 963 trifix.
Like and subscribe on Apple and Spotify, and leave us a review. If you want to support the show with a donation, you can find us on Venmo at Big Hormone and paypal.me/Big Hormone.
All right.
I have a funny thing I just remembered.
Yeah.
So I work at a market now, and like we get a lot of different kinds of people because it's like tourists and stuff like that. And I've noticed this thing because I work at a flower stand, so like not everyone's going crazy buying flowers, so I get to like sit and just people watch. And I've noticed, I even like texted my roommate today because I'm like, I'm freaking the fuck out because I've noticed that there will be like, you know, a girl and a guy like walking around together, and I look at them together and I'm like, God, I hope they're siblings. Like, I hope they're siblings because they look too much alike. And then they like hold hands or something. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, no.
Exactly.
It's every time. And it's one of the, like, this kind of, I mean, it's sort of related, but like, I just thought about it. But like Jung had written about this, and like, this kind of what Jungians talk about as well. But like, when you're projecting like the inner other out onto a partner, like it's kind of like with sexual instinct, you become really comfortable because they're holding like your other half, like they're taking full responsibility of what that energy is essentially. And so you're like only half of a person instead of a whole. And so then like, it's just two halves make a whole like that. So it'll be like, like typical gender stereotypes that like, you know, the dad will always rely on the mom to like send out Christmas cards or whatever, or like be the linking function. And then, you know, women and moms will always depend on the dad to like, you know, make the plans, fix the car or whatever, like all the practical kind of like that kind of thing.
Right. Because
it's just like a comfortable way to remain like half a person, you know?
I mean, there's so much there. Like, I'm always fascinated. You know, I mean, I don't know if it's just being me or is a sexual type or what, but like the siblingness of so many romantic couples is like very weird and creepy to me. And
it is.
I see it all the time, and it's like a neutralizing energy. Like,
I think it's neutral. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel like it's like, you know, it's like Princess Leia choosing Luke Skywalker instead of Han Solo, right? Like, it's like it doesn't. There a lot of those sibling relationships, whatever. Like, they don't feel creative, and like a lot of times, like men don't talk as openly as women do about like the sexual dynamics in a couple. I've noticed, like, so like male friend, like I don't know if it's a vulnerability thing. I don't know if it's like clueless thing, but like, often men aren't like, well, this is like everything's great, but our sexual connection is whatever. Like, so I've heard it a lot more from women who will be like, yeah, everything was great, great person, whatever, but like, yeah, we really don't have a sexual connection or whatever. And you know, it's like that. It's like it feels like it's when you know, from this whatever Darth Vader model that, you know, may or may not be accurate, but I'm still working with workshopping it. It's like when something about their own sense of eros, their own creativity, their own, what they're inspired by is still tied up in some external, then they get Luke Skywalker. You know, when it's still bound to Darth Vader, they get Luke Skywalker, versus when it's like an energy emanating from the irrational thing that just happens to like turn me on, but also challenge me, and you know, that is maybe Han Solo or whatever. It's like the sibling, like that's one of the reasons that's like that whole Star Wars thing is like so crazy to me, because it's like, oh damn, it nails that shit. Like the siblingness is so prevalent, and you know, I used to be terrified when I was like younger. There are so many like movies and stories, and you know, I for a time went down a rabbit hole of like, they're really on Facebook, all these reels, like they would, everything wants to be TikTok, and these reels of like transcribed Reddit posts about relationship fuck ups, and the split that, and there's a you know, we all know like the Madonna whore thing, I guess, in like, you know, in the male psyche, whereas like like what seems to be like a feminine version of that is like the safe guy and the bad boy or something like that, and the exciting person and like the good guy who's gonna like help me raise kids, but there's gonna be no thing there. And like I remember feeling so terrified, because I was like, it wasn't like I'm gonna be a bad boy or something like that. It was just like I just wanted to be like the guy, you know. I just want to be the chosen one for my partner, and then worried about where I would flip on this. Somewhere I'd be somewhere on the duality is what I'd be really afraid of, right? But like, it seems like a lot of that. It seems like that archetype or whatever that dynamic is really common in both men and women. Like they want a sibling partner.
Yeah,
I think really fucking weird.
It's definitely the comfortability, and that's probably like being, I mean, obviously it's being unconsciously chained by some kind of like you're saying, neutralizing, safe. I know this, I know that, like it's known to me. And that's like the thing with unconscious energy, and is that it is the unknown, and like your anima or animus kind of is the guide to the unknown, and so they also have to have a quality that is outside of what is known. And so it's just kind of like interesting in that way. But there was something I was going to say. I mean, that's where like in this in the Star Wars lore that we have here in this framework, in that sense, like, okay, so I do think that like Jung kind of had this like trajectory of individuation that like first what's really needed is shadow work, and like before you can meet the anima and animus, because I mean it makes sense to me, because like how do you know what really is the anima or animus if you haven't confronted all the shadows that they could be hiding? Like parts of it could be like all of the partners that are actually mother, and like you know, that kind of thing. So it's like understanding, and I think this is where like a social element of the sexual instinct kind of comes in. I really do think that there are like sexual shadows as well. So like,
yeah, totally.
Like, you know, not social qualities that are sort of like, oh, I don't like that, or I idolize that, but like sexual energies, like, you know, women who like the jealousy kind of thing going on in women, like, and the weird, like patriarchal shit that women can get into, like, that's a whole, you know, sexual kind of shadow. And like you're saying with men who are kind of trying to attract other men and not realizing it, like what is, and men just like masculinity being this terrible compartmentalized version of masculinity. I mean, like that's a huge fucking shadow.
I mean, they're like trying to attract other men while like terrified of being gay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's because they're trying to attract men and they're insecure about it.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, and like, you know, like with like trans people,
Mhm.
Like, and this is something a friend of mine kind of like, she framed it this way, but it's like trans people are like, you know, are like getting us to collectively think, like engage with masculine and feminine in a way that we can't
Yes.
pin down to a wall in like roles and any, you know, like they represent something like entirely kind of like
New.
new and like even though they're not new, right? Like they're
Mhm.
it's like there's a certain in the collective newness and as a very, you know, boring straight size whatever guy,
Yeah.
like to imagine like you know, and feeling very identified with being a male, like to feel like I'm not trying to be like a whatever, but like I mean to feel first that powerful alienation from
Mhm.
your own body and the expression of your body, and then to take steps to chemically or otherwise or hormonally or whatever change it and
Mhm.
present in a different way, is like it shows like how fucking powerful these like sexual energies are, both
Mhm.
interpersonal and intrapersonal sexual energies are.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like,
Because it's, and like in a social context, it is demanding this to be a part of the conversation, like to
yes,
be the uh, idea of sexuality, the idea of gender, like actually be challenged and understood energetically rather than through these roles, through these kind of like compartmentalized roles.
and like I remember when I was in college, like you know, I went to Evergreen, which was very like, you know, hippie or whatever.
Mm.
And people would sort of parrot this thing about like, I think they would say stuff like gender is a performance or something like this, or it was like a, you know, and that might be totally right, but there was there was like a kind of a sloppy college kids trying to, you know, reading like Judith Butler and like trying to like paraphrase it and make that like a thing. Um, you know what I'm talking about? And it was like,
Yeah, I get the vibe.
there was, yeah, but there was like an element of like neutralization
Hmm.
in like sexual energies. Like, oh, there was an element in like sort of the way it was being held as that like sexual polarity and sexual dimorphism is like it's just a social construct.
Hmm.
And like, you know, the transgender thing is like the energies are they're real psychic energy. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like they're not just fabrications. Like there's some out that our relationships to them can be really diverse and differentiated and particularized and all that kind of stuff like this. But like I just feel like in the sibling relationship and the way that like our like culture tries to hold these things are like the driest versions of sexual polarity.
Hmm.
And I feel like yeah, like they're so rich and strong and alive, and yet they're not like put into boxes. You know, like that, like they're so creative and volatile that they can't
Yeah.
even fit into a certain box. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
Yes. Yeah. Hmm. Well, and I feel like that's why, like, a lot of it is so. I mean, the way that I kind of see it too, and how it's kind of being written about a lot of the time is like to be like in contact with sort of like unconscious energy. Cause I think, you know, obviously each instinct can be creative in its own way, but I feel like the sexual instinct does have that more like creative kind of thing. And if you even think too, like sexual being overlapped with the body center, um, there is this anger that also is held in, yeah, anger is like a
Yeah, yeah,
massive like sexual kind of energy.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so having that, like when you're also understanding anger and how that is in the unconscious, like that sort of release that you get from like anger, like, you know, dropping anger or whatever, however you release tension and stuff like that, like also simultaneously releases this creative energy, with the kind of sexual energy that also is meant to kind of this building up tension and releasing it, like releasing creatively. There, like, you read poetry or you look at paintings or you said whatever, and like you can never really tell like who the artist is,
Right.
because there is this kind of gender fluidity going on in like kind of channeled creative work, like, and so I just find that interesting too, but a lot of it can be blocked by energy being like anger and trauma being trapped in the body, and I feel like it's all related. All three of those kinds of things are related, if any of that makes sense.
I think it does. I'm trying to see if like what you're speaking to is like what you're saying is like inspiring thoughts, but I'm like, how are the thoughts that are being inspired related? And I don't kind of know. But
Okay.
what I'm noticing related to this anger and release thing is like, you know, in what we're talking about, we're getting in like very conceptual swirls, right?
Yeah.
And there's a certain way that like this conversation is like, what are we talking about? And what is she talking about? What am I talking about? And then there's like, oh, I get it. And there's like a release kind of thing happening.
Yeah.
And part of what we're recording is like, I don't know if we're going to publish it anywhere or what. I mean, I think we kind of should. It's pretty interesting, but
yeah, I think so.
But like, I was like recently talking to Courtney, and we were talking about like the idea of integration, because that's something that she's like working with, right? And you know, being a 6, like we were saying about how like the way people think of integration is like, oh, I'm complete now, and now I can whatever, and it's like part of it is like perpetually living with like the void, you know, an uncertainty from a 6 point of view, or ambiguity. And there's like a like when we were having the weekend and like with David, and I was like, were you there when I was like saying all that shit about David? I think you'd left already, but I was saying a bunch of shit about David. I was basically saying like, you know, I get my little like downloads or my blasts or whatever when we're having a zone, and like was saying about David that like David's there to like perpetually confuse us, and like that David's brilliant, but he also like doesn't always know what he's doing and saying. And part of it is like his essence, whatever, is like it's like a vortex or a fractal moving that is always like throwing something out. And anytime you try to like pin down what David is definitively, he changes. And so you can never be like the minute you think like, oh, I totally know what David is, like David changes. And
that's like trickster kind of energy.
Like exactly. And so anyway, like this thing about like some of like the role or function of like art and creativity, and even like stuff like these conversations, is like we're never going to arrive at like solid ground. And part of it is like for us, and for, you know, and if anybody ever listens to this or whatever, but it's like to be perpetually kind of like just stretching, you know what I'm saying? Like there's that sense of, we're talking about like eros and yearning, and you know, whether it's sexual yearning or otherwise yearning, like these forces. Let's see, I'm going all over the place, but like last we talked about like synth flow and counter flow in like a recent Big Hormone episode, and how I was starting to like figure out aspects of what synth flow and counter flow are based on these autonomy conflicts that like I wrote about in my book.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, I remember that.
You know what I'm talking about?
Listen to that.
Yeah. It's basically like we're forever needing things outside of ourselves to regulate ourselves, but and that creates uncertainty and insecurity. But we also need to like feel secure in ourselves to make sure that we have the motivation to pursue those things instead of getting too depressed. But you know, the prototype of relying on things outside of ourselves is our mothers. And so every resource, whether it's food or attraction or being liked, is loaded with mother projection.
Oh my God.
And So we pursue it and we kind of want to merge with it. At the same time, we're terrified to merge with it because when we were merged with our mother psychologically early in life, we started erecting boundaries because we were overwhelmed by her unconscious whatever that we were
And she'll swallow
internalizing
you.
and couldn't discharge, the death mother, right? And so
Yep.
there's this like
Tension.
huge tension and charge. So I can't remember where the fuck I'm going with.
Well, I would think,
can't
and that's the thing where like the whole big Jungian sayings are like holding the tension of the opposites, and like that's in like so many spiritual things as
Right.
well, like holding the tension of the opposites, that it's just like it's also this dualistic, it's duality, it's paradox, it's all kinds of like there's so many factors being put into one thing, you know, like, and we're talking about masculine and feminine kind of stuff, and like why this is even being talked about in the collective and blah blah blah, like because it's not just these two things, like, you know, femininity doesn't look, this is not the image here, and like it does not act this way, and it does not present this way, and it does not follow these rules in life. Like the universe doesn't work on binaries, and so it's just like it's actually this paradox, and it's like there's so many things that could be true at once that contradict each other, and it's just like confusion. It just totally throws you off, like, and so understanding, like, I think that's where the sacrifice of the ego comes in, like letting go. Like the ego is the thing that's trying to constantly make sense of stuff, and like the mother archetype, I remember reading or listening to a lecture at one point that said that like the mother archetype is the thing that allows an ego to kind of like separate information. Like it allows to be like, oh, okay, that's what this is and that's what that is. It's your personality, like kind of just, oh, okay, that's how I make sense of the world. And so with her kind of too, just being like so, you know, universally misunderstood and kind of beaten and stuff like that, like we reflect that as well in our personality neuroticism, you know, like we're completely neurotic in the sense that we're trying desperately to hold on to something, and we're trying desperately to like understand something, and it's creating all, like we're having so much tension, but we're not able to hold it. And that's why it then gets projected out, and it gets projected out into this and that, the food, the partner, the whatever, the house, the social status. Like it gets projected so much because we don't believe, like the ego is too weak to hold it. Does that make sense?
Totally. But kind of like along those lines, and kind of what I was getting to with the autonomy thing, like part of the autonomy conflict thing was like, as I've been trying to understand on a deeper level, I've been seeing it in light of like to get a newborn baby to suddenly desperately need its mother so that we can survive, like to go from the womb where you're sort of just autistically, like, you know, complete in yourself, to then all of a sudden this awakening of energy, this like libidinal energy, to suddenly crave your mother, right?
Yeah.
Like to experience craving and then experience a solution to that craving is like a crazy biological feat, right? Like, because we didn't have that craving, we would just, you know, like, why aren't we born and we just fucking die? You know what I mean? Like, why aren't we just like, we just don't do anything, right? Like, it creates this like suffering that leads to yearning, that leads to a fixation on an object that will alleviate my suffering, and actually maybe even like extra stuff too, like pleasure. And so
bliss,
right? And like so anyway, this role of yearning, and I was thinking, let's see, trying to make sense of this. All right, so we're talking about like this like projection, almost like neutralizing projections in a certain way, but also kind of like, for me, there's also like the necessity to project, or like the like to keep us interested, you know, to keep us like alive, basically. Like like there's a certain, like a lot of the like the romantic sibling thing is like a trying to not be too alive in something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's
Oh,
like
yeah, that's true.
it's like there's like an awake neutralizing, and then there's like an asleep neutralizing. And one is like
Mhm.
trying to sleep with the new, like be not sleep with the neutralizing, but be asleep to the neutral. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Neutralizing and like a putting the fire out versus like
It's like a plateau. I'm just like, I'm good here. We'll just
Exactly.
coast. We'll coast here.
And
Mhm.
so like that, that energy that that infant has to suddenly like invest in mom and her body is
Mhm.
like libido, right?
Mhm.
And um let's see. There's this concept in Gurdjieff called Kunda buffer. Do you know what this is?
Mm-mm.
So Gurdjieff has like a really elaborate like cosmic mythology that is like pretty far out in psychedelic and stuff, and
And the different worlds or
different
realms.
worlds. But like, he's got that book Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. You know
Okay.
that book?
I know it, but I haven't read it yet.
It's like his, he a bunch of books, but that's like his main book, and it's like this, he like wrote it in like the 30s and 40s, and it's like a science fiction book, almost like before a lot of science fiction took off, and
Mhm.
it's about a higher being, kind of like an angel or something like that, called Beelzebub, which is named after a demon, Beelzebub, right?
Mhm.
And it's called Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. And so Beelzebub is on a spaceship for higher beings, talking to his grandson about the fucked up three-brained, three-centered beings on Earth.
Mhm.
And he's had 6 journeys to Earth throughout Earth's history, and he's just talking about basically how fucked up we are.
Mhm.
And it's written in this like really elaborate and hard to understand way. But anyway, the idea is that the way Beelzebub explains why humans are so fucked up relative to other other three-brained beings on other planets is that like in the cosmic bureaucracy long time ago there was like a mistake, and like the cosmos is like a basically like a mechanism to transform energies.
Mhm.
And it's a mechanism to transform energies because like the Godhead or whatever needs to counteract the negative effects of time and entropy.
All right.
So all of the cosmos is basically a complex mechanism of digestion of different energies and bringing energies back to the source in order to maintain the environment that the Godhead exists within.
Okay.
Because time is wearing it out. And so anyway, there is there's like a mistake on a cosmic level, on a higher level. So like even like higher beings can make mistakes, and it translates into the energy transformation process getting fucked up.
Mhm.
And humans have a distinct role to play, and there's like an octave, like a do,
Mhm.
re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. So humans live in the mi, fa octave, and we transform energies. But then there's some cosmic mistake, and so to rectify the mistake and the imbalance, higher beings introduce into us an organ called the organ Kunda buffer, and it fixes this problem. Like the energy gets rerouted for a certain amount of time, and then when that process is done, the higher beings took this organ out of us. But the organ caused our consciousness to get all fucked up and cluttered, and what we know is human. And so the organ is gone, but we got acclimated to the results of the organ Kunda buffer.
Okay.
And so Kunda buffer, you could say he calls it like the consequences of this organ Kunda buffer is a way of talking about why we're asleep, why we're fucked up.
Mhm.
And I thought like, and then in Search of Miraculous, which is about Gurdjieff as well, it's by Ouspensky, but
Mhm.
there's a part where Gurdjieff warns against Kundalini.
Mm.
Like, and he talks about Kundalini as being the energy of imagination and fantasy and like nonsense fantasy, right? Like not good
Okay, yeah.
imagination.
Yeah, right.
Delusion. And I was thinking like, all right, I mean, maybe Kundalini is like this fucked up bad energy. And I know people who've experienced what they would call like a Kundalini experience. And I'm not sure if I have or not. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, it seemed like you have this libidinal energy that the born infant needs to invest in its mother and then gradually invest into instinctual resources as it separates from its mother psychologically. Like I go from the breast to feeding myself Cheerios and all that kind of stuff. And, going from her, merge with her and then rapprochement and trying to merge again and being like, I can't merge with, and this kind of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking like, I wonder if in this schema of things, like what Gurdjieff is warning against is that libidinal energy that is just getting projected, it's just getting invested.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of like, if I'm not just trying to make Kundalini work in this schema or something, that like part of like what withdrawing projection and awakening or whatever means is having the energy of Kundalini or libido alive, but not invested in any particular thing. Because I feel like,
I see
what I'm calling like the romantic sibling relationship that's very neutral is like asleep. It's like an asleep thing versus like you can withdraw that energy and not have it be this like sleepy, neutral, nothing, but it can stay withdrawn, but creative and still kind of like, if you find the Buddha, kill the Buddha. It's like you keep going toward an unknown. And I feel like art and the shit we're talking about are like different ways to like keep your consciousness stretching into an abyss that is a rich abyss rather than just a neutralized abyss. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. No, that makes sense. Yeah. I think what's interesting too with Gurdjieff, zooming out with Gurdjieff, because I feel like, I don't know where this is in me, type or whatever, but like I always see the work that people put out as just never quite finished. Like they put out something important, but it's not the whole deal.
Yeah.
And one of the things with Gurdjieff, I don't remember where I was reading it, if I was looking something specific of, I don't know. But I saw that he also demonized the moon.
Yes. Yeah.
Like he hated the moon. And so maybe your Kundalini thing and what I saw about the moon, it could be too Gurdjieff's own demonization of that aspect of feminine.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, tie what you were saying to the moon, like just remind me in this context.
Like how the moon is like feminine, kind of, or what do you mean?
I guess like I'm like halfway there with you, but I'm like
okay. So I'll break it down. So Gurdjieff, like I think he had. It's actually interesting. I've been meaning to tell you that one of these, when we got into the head center on our podcast, which is Sinsomnia, by the way, in case this gets published.
What's the name of the podcast?
It's called Sinsomnia. It's
okay.
Dreams and the Enneagram. What I noticed, actually, I had a friend tell me halfway through the head center that we're doing, because we went through the body and then we went to the heart and now we're at the head. And they were like, hey, like you're kind of accidentally doing what Gurdjieff would write about, which is that whole, like, there's an instinctual version of each center and then the higher version, right? And so like we accidentally realized that in our episodes. It was just like, oh, here's the instinctual version and here's where it's like, holy fuck, repressed in each center. Like it needs its own awakening from the unconscious in order to get to like the higher version of that center. So like accidentally, that's kind of where we were going in the podcast. So in that sense, like with Gurdjieff and his importance on body movements and stuff like that, it's great. But, and I think I remember asking you first, which is why then I kind of looked at it. He never went into like unconscious material, like what is happening in the unconscious, like where do the projections even come from, like why do we have them, where did they come from? And maybe I think is he like an 8 or was maybe that's, I
think
guess,
yeah.
theoretical. That could be really rejection-y as well. Just like, well, it's out there, but I don't know where it's come from because I've cut it off, that kind of thing. And so I see this reflected in he hates the moon. And the moon is the feminine. The moon symbolically represents the feminine, and therefore, not therefore, but the moon in tons of mythology and astrology, stuff like that, is the instincts as well, because it is the closest planet to Earth. Therefore, it's very closely related to humans and their experience, and it impacts our environments, right? Like the moon and the tides kind of thing. So it's this feminine energy and it's instinctual energy and it's mother, and he hated the moon. And I'm like, huh.
Well, the way he saw the moon is like you could say there's a scale, a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
And on the high side or the top of the octave is the Holy Son Absolute, right? Like the Godhead or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that the universe is in a process of differentiating and articulating from the source.
Mm-hmm.
And at the opposite end of that source is what he called the moon, which, whether it's the literal moon or whatever, I don't know. But your stuff, that's very interesting what you're saying. And there's stuff that resonates. But the moon relative to the Earth is like in air quotes, like a dead planet, right? It's like rock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no life. There's no atmosphere. And so in that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, that's called solfeggio. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but solfeggio is that do, whatever. But those stand for different words that symbolize these different layers of the cosmic octave. So do is dominus, si is sidereum, and so you'd say the absolute, and then there's all galaxies or something, and then la is lacterium, the Milky Way, and then what is and then sol is the sun, and fa is fatum, which is the realm of the planets, so astrology.
Okay, that's cool.
There's the interval where the humans exist in that, and that's where we are. We're between the planets and the Earth. And the Earth is me, which is mixtus orbis, the mixed world. And then Re is Regina Cole, which is the queen of heaven, which is the sun, which is the moon. And then there's Do again, which is Dominus. So it's it goes back. But the idea is that in this part of this universal digestion of cosmic energies, that the moon is is sucking, or as a vampire, or is the growing edge of the universe that needs energies. And it's a negative force, not in a negative way, but it's the holy oppositional force. It's set, it's Apophis versus Ra. And that all between them is an octave that is the realm of creation and matter, of reconciling these two opposites. And so the moon, but he does have so that's that's the Gurdjieffian thing, but he does talk about us being unconscious, but he doesn't have the he's not as rich with what the what the unconscious is and means. And yeah, it's very eight-ish too. It's very much there's an over practicality in his, despite how imaginative and bizarre a lot of his mythology and work is, there is a weird thing. And I have an essay that I could send you if you're interested, about Gurdjieff's sexuality and role of sex in his work.
Yeah. I would love to.
He had a weird relationship to sexuality and to women. And he had a lot of despite being very against masturbation, he had a lot of lovers and a lot of kids, and he would kind of speak sometimes disparagingly about women, and then at the same time his most intimate, devoted students were a bunch of lesbians called the Women of the Rope. And
all right.
his student that he basically passed his work on to was Madame de Salzman.
Okay.
And So it's very strange.
That is
it's like
really weird.
There's a lot of weird feminine stuff in there that would be.
Well, and that's because it is like, I mean, he does teach body centered kind of stuff. And in a way that's not, I mean, for the time period, again, a context here that women, and their bodies were just either overly sexualized or it's religious, repressed religious stuff, whatever. Or like you even think of like dancing at the time. Like if you were to be a dancer as a woman, it was so like strict and disciplined that it sounds like the things that he does teach with the body are much more in some kind of like attunement to the body rather than like a harsh discipline to it. So like I could see why that would be appealing as what just like in it of itself in that time context wise.
Like the movements he teaches, they are very disciplined, but they start from attunement. Like sensation is the foundation of the fourth way, and then Gurdjieff stuff. And he called I don't remember exactly his quote, but it was like sensation is equivalent to the moon in this like sense of scale, where it's like it's the foundational end of the polarity, and you need to connect the two ends of the pole. But what you were talking about with like the centers, like, he's got like the moving part of the moving center, the feeling part of the moving center, and the intellectual part of the moving center. And you talked about it as like, how did you describe it? You said something about like bringing
being in touch with why those instincts of the centers would be unconscious. So it's like bringing them up from the unconscious in order to even get them to like the higher quote unquote versions of the centers.
Because the way he talked about it was like certain parts of the centers are only accessible through a refined kind of attention, right? Like a higher or more disciplined attention. And so like the instinctual or the moving part of the intellectual center is called the formatory apparatus, which is just like the secretary of the brain. It's just like,
okay,
how are you doing? Good. How are you? It's like, and most people's just mind stays there. It's just there's no thinking. It's just it's mimicry, right? And so I wonder, obviously, to make something that is unconscious conscious requires attention. But I wonder if there's something that you're bringing where there's attention, but then there's the like ambivalent or not ambivalent, ambiguous psychic waters that you also still need to engage with on their own ambivalent terms to have a conscious relationship with, instead of just rendering it into the light of higher attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I mean, in this, we're like really kind of just spinning the globe around of each of these like masculine and feminine things, but like another dual perspective of it is that, masculinity are kind of these thought and order and like logic. It's what the eyes can see, like visually, tangibly, what the eyes can see. And then like the feminine energy is illogic. It is or the non-rational side of things, the image, like it is engaging on a level where you can't quite put logic to it, and that's why you need to kind of speak in cryptic language, the creative language of poetry, the creative language of symbols, like that's kind of that area. And so it's that's where like on the podcast we're kind of like going through, which is Sinsomnia, by the way. Again, just to let everyone.
You have a podcast?
It's called Sinsomnia. You can listen to it on any listening platform. But so we have like we go into like the weird, like non-rational, the illogical realm of these centers and stuff. Like, so if we're talking about, and this is where it came up with head center, because I started questioning like, all right, fear is in the head center, right? So like, what is like neurotic fear, our personalities fear, and then what is instinctual fear? Like, and then what is that? Like, why is that? Like, why is that happening in our unconscious? Like, we're kind of always in some kind of neurotic fear state, but then there's this instinctual fear that just completely gets like kind of masked in the neurotic fear, I think, if that makes sense. It's
think so.
projected in its own way.
All right, what's the difference between instinctual fear and neurotic fear?
Okay, how do I explain it? So instinctual means that these energies are somewhere in the body. And like even when we were on the body center, the type of like research that you can find out there with like even just memory, which hello, also the moon is where memory is. And it's like memory is just like in the body. Like it's not just in the brain. It's like in the, there's so many studies out there that prove this, but whatever. So like instinctually things are happening in the body because that's like the instinctual level. So instinctual fear would be like, your fight, flight, freeze kind of responses. Like an animal is about to, like, a bird is in the mouth of a cat and it freezes as an instinctual fear response because it is literally like depending itself, like it's depending on this tactic, this defense tactic to be like the only chance of its survival, right? Like every animal has some kind of instinctual fear response. And it's just like this terror of life or death. And so humans have that instinctual fear, but because like our societies are so disconnected from instinct, like, even just disconnected from nature and actually having and being connected to that instinctual fear response that would save you like that's what it's built to do, but whether or not you're saved, it doesn't matter. Your body's just going into that response. Like it gets trapped. Like, you experience something terrifying.
Yes.
This is where trauma comes in. Like you experience something terrifying and it gets trapped and the nature cycle does not continue. Like, a bird, then the cat lets the bird go and it's frozen for a bit and then it shakes it off and it flies away. Like we don't have like the shaking off part of the process really. And we're not really connected to our nature, like our instinctual nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this heavy instinctual energy that the head is kind of supposed to be in contact with is totally like compartmentalized and stuck in whatever the ego's being neurotic about. And so it gets channeled into this, neuroses. It's some kind of fear then that when we talk about head types and we talk about the head center, like, of uncertainty, of did I leave my stove on? Like whatever map I don't have enough pieces to this map, so I can't make full sense of it. This is the narrative I know, and anything outside of that narrative is just terrifying. So I'm just gonna whatever 5 rejects, 6 reacts, whatever, like that kind of thing.
Right.
So just like instead of really letting that fear be in the instinctual realm, like take its place in the body, it exists in like the weak ego. Because the ego thinks it has control rather than understanding that the body also has its control. And I think that's also why zooming out and being a part of the collective conversation is how many health problems people have because of that. Like the mind, like the mind body connection. It's like all of the importance is put on the ego, and our egos are so fucking weak to begin with that they cannot have the full control that we believe that they do. And therefore, there's no trust in the body, and the body just has these symptoms to try and start the dialogue of something is like there's too much energy being put in the wrong place. You know what I mean? Yeah, and so we just have all these collective health issues.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the algorithm has been feeding me like body cam footage of like police shit, and it's become
boy.
like a little. It's become like a little like, you know, I hate police, but it's like become like a little thing, you know, like a fixation. Like I'm like, there's something like the kind of all right, so what's fascinating to me about it is that you see these like, you know, you can never see the cop's face, right? You hear them panting and whatever, and they're running up to like a normal looking house and relatively normal looking house. And then something like is often horrifying inside the normal shell, right? Like there was one that was particularly intense that I watched where it was about this old man developed a certain kind of dementia that makes you violent, and he ripped his wife apart. Like,
oh no!
and the cops were like vomiting, you know, like they were so disgusted. Like it was blurred out, so I couldn't see the whole thing, but I got enough of a sense that was like, whoa. And it's like going
Oh my
down like
God.
a suburban street, and then like it's like hell is opened up.
Yeah, that's
And they're not.
horrific.
It's horrific. That was probably the most intense, but there are always different versions of this, like of the outside, the quiet neighborhood, the quiet street. And then cops are descending, and because hell has happened somewhere, and like hell is like leaking into our reality, and these like people with weak egos, these cops are like trying to handle it, and you know they're always like scared kids with guns and
with guns,
yeah, like in body armor, and like they can call their friends, back up. And it's always this like that's one other thing that's really interesting about these videos is there's a certain like immaturity on I mean, obviously it's a stressful situation. We'd all react in regressed ways or whatever, but me on the computer can be like, these immature idiots, you know, but like there's still like there's like at least like an emotionally unintelligent way that a lot of these guys are operating. Like like they get scared and they start just throwing people on the ground that are like, you know, that, you know, I mean, everything we hate about cops, like you just see them play in real time because they're scared. And there's that, you know, anyway, it's really interesting, but it's like the, like hell is always ready to burst out of like super normal stuff. And one of the things that's always interesting is like these videos bring you into the reality of the body because people themselves are very like ill. And then there's like the mental illness, then there is like the scarcity around like money or whatever, so they hired to kill like their spouse or something, or they hired to kill a spouse because of like a sexual relationship, or the horrors of just like hearing the like the breath of the cop, just the fear, or the ways that like a somebody who is handcuffed or trying to be handcuffed like gets pinned down. Like even just that like I'm doing, you know, kung fu now, and like it's all about like the way you move your body, and it's so much like a Gurdjieff movement, and the ways that you're limited by like tension or a lack of attention in a certain part of the body, or your habitual way of moving. And so there's something about these like police videos that brings you into you know, there's like the outside of the house, which is like, oh, it's a complete intact body, but then inside is like the illness, you know, the contamination, the hell, the suffering. It's like you're talking earlier about like the body as feminine and the light as masculine, and light in the body as like a soul or something, or like as a complete and it's like that gone wrong, you know. It's like the biomechanical alien from Aliens has like bursted through the chest, and the wound is just going everywhere, and it's just like horror, you know, like horror in its like distilled form. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and that's what's interesting, because I'm like following that as an image, and it's just like, like when you have such an ideal image, like, you know, the suburban neighborhood,
right?
And it's just like, who when did we all collectively agree that that was aesthetically pleasing? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. And it's ugly as fuck always.
it's
right.
so ugly. And so when you go in, like, that is where like a lot of horrors are, because it's like completely out of our nature and it's not creatively made at all. Sorry to the person, but not sorry, whoever designed suburban houses. But like, you know, it's not reflecting anything of our instinctual nature. I think
Totally.
it's some kind
really
of
well
weird, compartmentalized,
Thomas Kincaid painting. Yeah.
yeah, like boxed ideal, whatever we think we collectively agreed upon it. And that's too another thing that James Hillman often talks about is like aesthetically, like we are like our aesthetics really reflect, and this is kind of cool what we found out in like the image center on our episode, like our aesthetics.
What are you talking about?
Oh yeah, on Sinsomnia, this podcast it's a podcast that I'm on.
Interesting.
It talks about dreams in the Enneagram. It's called Sinsomnia, and you can follow it on any platform. But it's like his kind of thing that he can go on sometimes is that like it's very three fix too, because it's just like, you know, culturally we all like there's a lot more three fix, and so it's just kind of this clean, productive, efficient kind of aesthetic image. And he would say, you know, it's obviously that like it's not really, it's reflecting like something about our own like Puritan kind of like clean image that we need to have of ourselves and stuff like that. So there's obviously like a reflective thing, but then to bring in that there's this like ugly hell going on in it is interesting. I mean, like even just in the nuclear family, like that is what's happening.
Right.
Because if you would think like that kind of like brutality does exist in nature, like in animals and stuff like that, but it becomes like a part of nature. And so there's this like really interesting thing in the one book that I'm reading right now by Marion Woodman, and she talks about masculinity in women. She goes on this kind of thing about like the hero's journey, like what's kind of wrong with the hero's journey and this whole like slaying the dragon kind of thing. And she attributes the dragon to be kind of like the mother and feminine and stuff like that.
Interesting.
And one of the things that she said that was really cool was that like, oh, you know, people keep concretizing the image of the slaying. And concretizing is basically to make an image flat and concrete, you know, and so it doesn't move, which is against its nature because images should always be like moving. And so she said, people are mistaking the slaying of the dragon, they're concretizing it into murder instead of into sacrifice. And so, right, like all of these incredibly brutal, like you can apply it to literally everything, like even to, you know, our consumption of animals. Like we are murdering them. Like we are murdering people, like, and it is just murder because we've concretized that image of slaying into murder rather than as sacrifice. And so it's just like not understanding the two, like that's kind of where the hero's journey can go wrong, and where like individuality or identity even becomes so concretized because it is this like Apollonian light, I am the one, I am the chosen one, blah, 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 rather than this kind of more collective understanding of things, or this collective effort to things, if that makes sense.
I think so. I mean, the overall thing makes sense. There's pieces I got to digest, but like, I mean, that murder versus sacrifice is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm even like thinking of, I don't know, like well, yeah, I guess there's a lot in like nature, and like in really like ancient cultures, there would be a lot more respect to what sacrifice was, like rather than just straight up murder. Like there was a lot of like brutality was some kind of sacrificial act rather than just straight up, I hate you and you should die, you know?
Well, it's, you know, like, yeah, I mean, it's pinging a lot of stuff. Like sacrifice is a big deal in the Gurdjieff work, but it's like sacrificing some element of the ego, right? Like it's some sacrifice of, you know, what we kind of already like touched on. It's like sacrificing some identity, some loop, some pattern, you know, something that
something that's concretized.
Something concretized, you know, Gurdjieff says we have many eyes, many selves, and it's like sacrificing something that those eyes depend on to keep their fragmented energy going. But so with these fucking stupid police videos, you know, a lot of the cops are the like male gaze masculine, you know, like, and then they will like somehow fuck up or be like idiots or weird or something in the process of dealing with these people, or like even something like like not having compassion or, you know, something along these lines. And they'll be in like they'll show like the like interview after with the cop where they're going over what happened, and you can see the cop's like afraid, and he's like afraid of being like found out for doing something wrong that was on the body cam. And it's just like a little boy, and you know, he was trying to slay the dragon, and he wasn't kind of chaotic enough inside himself, like integrated chaos in himself to like deal with the outer chaos, because he was like trying to make himself so intact and bulletproof and impenetrable and on the side of the law and like according to the code or something. And it's like fucks himself over in this way. It's like he responds so literally to the event.
Yeah.
With like a go ahead.
That's kind of like where a lot of like women who talk about feminine journeys and just even like the importance of feminine energies, like understanding it being more of a collective kind of thing, is because it's like that sort of identity arc where it's like the patriarchy kind of breaking that word down without all of its, you know, associations, is it's hierarchical. It's like we deal with human beings on a hierarchy rather than as equals. And so even just there, it's like you are putting one guy like, I mean, there's maybe several police officers or whatever, but like you're putting so much power and importance in one person and what they decide to do. And like you're saying, like they have such weak egos. Like they probably like, you know, they're like what, 25 or something, or like they're young. They maybe just started a family. They haven't even gone into like any inner work.
Older guys.
Or that,
older guys,
like,
but they're psychologically 25.
Yes, like you know, that there's something about them that just like has not had any time to develop at all, and yet we're like, you automatically get power and rank based off of like this one indication. And so that's like there's a book that I read, it's called like Into the Heart of the Feminine, and this talks a lot about Death Mother and stuff like that, and how it's like identity based culture that can really cause all of this suffering and pain in us, because we're kind of holding ourselves to this idealistic sort of thing. So it's like and then therefore kind of course the idealistic image or whatever isn't really our own. So kind of withdrawing from that participation altogether can kind of really help you connect with your actual identity that doesn't need to be on some kind of hierarchy or competition or something like that.
Yeah, with that kind of, tell me if I'm taking this in a nonsensical direction, but like one of the things I'm always struck by in these videos is how ugly everything is. Like we're talking about like the ugly aesthetic of the house and just like the street and the cops and like the clothing people wear. It's all incredibly ugly, you know, like, and it's like people confuse like things that are sort of like pleasing because they're familiar with attractive or pretty or aesthetic, right? Like the house is ugly, but it's familiar, so it feels like comforting in some way. And then there's hell inside, right? But like, you know, your identity. And I do kind of think of things in terms of the Enneagram, like the Enneagram process, and like Enneagram process has a hole at the bottom. You know, it's like perpetually in hold. It's like there's a lack. And a lot of the, like things like art and aesthetics that are like genuinely aesthetically something, they contain a aspect that pulls you out of certainty, that pulls you out of knowing and pulls you into curiosity and into exploration and into, it's like reality is like forever ambiguous and proliferating new perspectives or dynamics or the ends of the paradox. It's like constantly novel. And art is one way that humans can engage in that paradoxical novelty and an identity enrichment that is an identity opening rather than closing and holding, or like solidifying. It's like, it's like enriching, but it's like keeping the openness of the Enneagram, keeping the gap going, but having a relationship with that irrational, empty, other part, and living with it instead of trying to completely solve it. Cause like the cop, or like even like a model or whatever, these are like, or a lot of influencers on social media are like trying to project a complete ego. Like the ego, an ego ideal. Like I always looked at like models and I was like, like what they're not always necessarily like sexy, but what they're doing, I think, is embodying like an ego ideal, like a completely symmetrical, hard personality, And so anyway, it was like this thing about like, all right, hell is erupting amidst the complete absence of like aesthetic beauty of any kind, and beauty cannot necessarily mean like it's beautiful. It's like, it can be like whatever, but it's like there's no soul here. And when there's no souls, like hell erupts in the suburban box,
in the suburban. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would, it's, that a lot of the stuff that James Hillman was talking about was in that thought of the heart piece. It's an essay that he wrote.
Yeah. I gotta read.
And it sounds a lot like, cause you can really, I mean, like, I think he's a 1, so you can like just really feel the gut rage of how everything is ugly in society. And it's that idea of the heart, like, and beauty, like Aphrodite, like needing something beautiful, whatever that means to a person, to kind of awaken the heart and awaken the actual like image. And the image or identity of a person should be more fluid and should be kind of changing. And just like the images of dreams every night coming from, your own psyche are changing all the time. You'll never have like the same exact dream each time. Like your image is always moving with your experiences and updating and stuff like that. And so to have some kind of weird, like crystallized image is like killing the soul for sure.
I mean, when I had that like big mushroom experience, like that I like, we did an episode on where I was like dying with Emeka. I had the sense that like, well, my being has done like, it's reached the end of the line and all these different things. Like I really thought I was like, I literally thought I was going to die, and not because my body was going to fail, but because like my psyche had completed certain processes or whatever.
And it's just going to go out.
Yeah, I was just going to snuff out. Like I was recognizing that reality was not real, that it was like an elaborate maze, like in Westworld. Have you ever seen Westworld? We should watch the first season of Westworld. The rest of them are shitty, but the first season is amazing and very Gnostic.
I'd watch the first season.
But yeah, I was like, everything is like in a movie. Like we're talking so much about fucking like Star Wars, and Star Wars isn't real. And it's an arrangement of things to get you to invest in a particular way in certain, like, Carrie Fisher is not Princess Leia, but you're like, wow, Princess Leia and Han Solo have such good chemistry, and it's they're pretending, but it's like all of reality is like in it. Yeah, and all of reality is an event to get you to experience something. Experience certain emotions or certain perspectives or something. And it was like that whole totality of what the movie of reality could have presented was like getting me to realize that it was all a movie and that I was about to snuff out.
Mhm.
And it was this sense of like completion is death. And so like even when we're talking about things like becoming more whole or integrated, like or whatever, to actually do that is to be moving toward your death,
Yeah, definitely.
to move toward your end. And so
Mhm.
like how to keep moving towards something, but keeping it like ambiguous and rich and novel
Mhm.
is like that's been a thing that I've been like paying attention to lately. Is like, you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
It's actually interesting. So there's two things with that. Okay, they're about to leave my brain, and I'm trying to keep them to leave my brain. One, oh, okay, yeah. One is like, I mean, the soul's journey is not complete in one lifetime. Like if you believe in like the transmigration of souls, like you don't, like your soul will continue on, and like you're saying, it's going to experience what it needs to experience in this body in this lifetime. So it's that idea that like, and you know, whether you believe it or not, but it's like um something about like that's where karma kind of comes in. Karma's not just like, oh, you were good here, so next lifetime you'll be a fucking king or something. It's more like you're going to experience what your soul needs to experience in this lifetime, and the next lifetime it gets a whole other different experience that it needs, and it's what it needs is like totally, you know, its own thing. It's autonomous in its own way, and that's where you have people really disconnected from their soul because they aren't connected with their soul's needs. It's more like I'm caught up in the neurosis and the needs of the mom and the needs of the project, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then two, that also kind of ties into our head center stuff, because once we got onto like the instinctual fear, then all right, when you're kind of more in contact with that, what is like the higher mind? And the higher mind is like that ability to connect to kind of like the edges of reality and the absolute unknown. You know, like there's only so much. There's this wonderful piece we just kind of like blabbed about on an episode by Rudolf Otto called "The Idea of the Holy," and it is where like the term numinous was coined originally, which is this like numinous. It's this religious, this holy experience. So he breaks down what holy means, and then like it kind of feels very like head and heart in a way, which is interesting because of like if they're overlapping 3 and 6 and the self-pres social are next to each other, you know. And anyway, like it's just so interesting how it's sort of like when the ego finally encounters something that is not itself, like God, that it will completely, like the narrative change. Like when you have a truly religious experience, like your whole personhood can just change, because it's like my concept of reality is just completely different now. I'm like, I need to reassess values, reassess blah, 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 like whatever. Like you have this experience where you kind of like encounter something so much larger than yourself and unknown that you're like, you get put into perspective very, very small compared to that, you know, but it's not like a bad smallness. It's just like, you know, sacred smallness.
I feel like, you know, going back to Alien, like I feel like the alien in Alien represents like alien, like God, or like like the not self thing the ego encounters. You know what I mean? It's like the ultimate beyond that. Like you can't integrate or assimilate. You know, it's like the perpetual dark that like keeps being this like this perceptual vortex into like a deeper abyss. You know, it's like what does it mean to be like actually alien to our consciousness? You know, and it's like anyway, it's like living with that kind of the hole in everything is like yeah, it's like living with that is to actually like, this is cheesy, but like to actually live, because it's like
Yeah.
it's like so much of like all this other stuff we're talking about is like a certain ossification. It's a certain concretization,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like trying to plug the leak instead of just
Yeah,
like,
and it's almost like that's like the 2D life, like the projection. We're interacting with the projection rather than
right.
pulling it back in and then actually relating with life. And that's also something that we kind of talked about on the body center, because body being like very related to boundaries and like, okay, am I perceiving my boundary to be crossed? And then how do I respond to that? Blah, blah, blah. That's not the only thing, but it was one of the things we talked about. And it's just like, you think of like Enneagram type structures, like, especially if your body center, whatever that is, like it's going to respond to all of these like perceived boundaries. It's just like it is projected, like it's not actually happening. Like we get angry about stuff that we shouldn't really be angry about because it's the perceived crossing of boundaries, like that kind of thing. Right. So it's just like, what would it mean to actually like be with a person or like in life with that kind of like veil lifted or whatever? And that's where I think the like finding those boundaries or like finding those projections in the unconscious, like when your eyes are closed, like that's when you can actually see the beings that you are interacting with rather than life itself. And I think that's why it's like that's where like the hatred of life really comes from, is because our own like connection to it is filled with such hate. Like, because it's hatred of our own projections rather than like actual life itself. I feel like the process of soul making and connecting to soul is like you fall in love with that experience, like you fall in love with life in that sense. But like until you can actually kind of clear the way of that, it just is a pile of shit.
Yeah.
Follow me for more tips.
Yeah, I'm still wading through shit.
Yeah, I mean that's that's the thing too. Like you can fall in love. Like you're not gonna like randomly get out of the shit and be like, wow, everything's clean and shiny. Like no, it's more like you fall in love with wading through the shit as well. Like because the shit is part of Earth and life and everything. But like, is there a way to actually? That's why I love doing dream work. Where you can hear it on our podcast called Sinsomnia.
Do a podcast. I didn't know it.
Yeah, podcast. It's Sinsomnia, and you can actually like that. Even it's painful. Like these kinds of realizations can be really but like again with the whole feminine energy in everybody, like there's such a beauty in like pain, in like true just like fucking useless pain because like something comes from that. It's like the horrible letting go in order for something else to kind of come in. And then there's a love of the something new coming in. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's going to be. And like, I can welcome it now though, because I let go of this ugly thing, So I think there's a beauty in that process.
Did you know it's a real thing? I'm real life. Nothing, not so long ago. All of my day, finding it strange. Someone around you will call. It's okay. Real